Every December, millions of people celebrate Christmas believing they're honoring the birth of Jesus. But what if I told you that historically speaking, Christmas wasn't created to remember a birthday? It was created to solve a problem. And once you understand what the problem was, the history of Christmas suddenly makes a lot more sense. The story we're usually told about Christmas is simple. Jesus was born, Christians remembered it, and the tradition never stopped. The historical record tells a very different story. Christmas wasn't remembered, it was assembled, like the Avengers. And it wasn't assembled all at once. Let's unpack it together. Christmas did not begin as the birthday of Jesus. The New Testament never gives a date for Jesus' birth, nor does any gospel author suggest that commemorating it held religious importance. While Matthew and Luke include birth narratives, they function theologically, establishing identity, fulfillment, and symbolism, not liturgically. There is no command, hint, or precedent in the New Testament for celebrating Jesus' birth annually. What is striking is that the only explicit birthday celebrations mentioned in Scripture belong to rulers and elites, not saints. Pharaoh's birthday feast in Genesis chapter 40, verses 20 through 22, and Herod Antipas' birthday banquet in Matthew chapter 14, verse 6 through 11, it's also in Mark chapter 6, verse 21, are the clearest examples, and both are framed negatively, each culminating in death. There is a possible third reference that appears in Job chapter 1, verse 4, where Job's sons feast each on his day, though scholars debate whether this refers to birthdays or a rotating hosting custom. Even here, the text remains ambiguous. Taken together, scripture presents birthdays not as sacred milestones, but as power centered social rituals associated with political authority, often heathen political authority. This pattern shaped early Christian thinking. Origen, born around 185 CE in Alexandria, Egypt, explicitly addressed the issue in the homilies of Leviticus, commonly cited as Homily 8.3. Origen argues that no saint in Scripture is recorded as celebrating a birthday and observes that only sinners do, specifically pointing to Pharaoh and Herod. He further notes that both birthday celebrations are stained with death. Origen is not issuing a biblical prohibition, he's making a moral theological observation rooted in narrative patterns. Birthdays, in his view, belong to the world of rulers, excess, and spectacle, not to the lives of the righteous. This helps explain why early Christians treated birthdays, including Jesus, with suspicion or indifference rather than reverence. It's not until the early third century that Jesus' birth date even becomes a subject of serious discussion. Clement of Alexandria in the late second to early third century reports that some Christians were attempting to calculate the date of Jesus, which they used the term Genesis, which can mean birth or origin, but proposing dates such as 25 Pashon or 2425 Parmuthi according to the Egyptian calendar. Clement's phrasing is telling. He says there are those who have determined the date, not the church knows. His tone reflects speculation, not inherited memory. Historically, this indicates that there was no universal apostolically remembered birthday date circulating as any type of settled fact. Christians were beginning to engage in chronography, timeline construction, using reign years of emperors like Augustus and Tiberius, local calendars, and symbolic reasoning, often without the stable biographical data we would expect if such information had been preserved by eyewitnesses. This is especially notable given later claims that Christianity emerged from a tightly connected circle of apostles, including one, John, who allegedly had a close relationship with Jesus' mother. Clement's testimony suggests that precise calendar knowledge was never part of Christianity's original information stream. This absence is not accidental. Early Christianity was overwhelmingly focused on resurrection, not birth. It began as an apocalyptic movement whose central proof, the return of Christ, was expected imminently. Resurrection functioned as validation that the end of the age had already begun. As time passed and that return failed to materialize on the expected schedule, the movement faced growing cognitive and theological pressure. One of the most effective ways to preserve coherence was to historicize Jesus more fully. shifting emphasis from resurrection and return as imminent verification to biography, calendar, and ritual as enduring anchors. Assigning a birth date did not solve the delay, but it relocated meaning into sacred time rather than unmet expectation. In the broader ancient world, birthdays were widely recognized as pagan affairs tied to rulers, gods, and cosmic symbolism, which further explains why early Christians avoided them altogether. For roughly the first 3 centuries of Christianity's turbulent existence, there was no Christmas because there was no perceived need for one. Now, let's talk about why December 25th. December 25th appears centuries after the beginnings of Christianity, and it does so for very practical reasons. It does not enter the record because someone suddenly discovered Jesus' birthday. It appears late because the date was already carrying heavy symbolic weight across the Mediterranean world. This is not about hidden knowledge, it's about temporal real estate. By the time Christianity was forced to adapt to delay, late December was already saturated with meanings of renewal, reversal, and cosmic reassurance. In the Roman world, the second half of December was one of the most symbolically charged periods of the year. The most influential festival was Saturnalia, December 17th through the 23rd, dedicated to Saturn, the agricultural god associated with the mythic Golden Age. That Golden Age was imagined as a time of abundance, equality, freedom, and the absence of rigid hierarchy. Saturnalia was not simply a party, it was a ritualized suspension of social order. During the festival, enslaved people temporarily dined as equals. Authority was mocked through Lord of Misrule figures. Gambling and public feasting were permitted, and small symbolic gifts were exchanged. Sociologically, Saturnalia functioned as a pressure release valve for Roman hierarchy, a nostalgic rehearsal of an idealized moral past, and a way to endure winter scarcity through communal excess. What matters is not merely that Saturnalia existed, but what it trained people to expect. It normalized seasonal inversion, embedded the idea that social and moral order could be symbolically reset, and taught that time itself could be ritually renewed at year's end. Christianity did not invent this logic, it later inhabited it. Even more significant is the rise of Sol Invictus, whose prominence peaks in the 3rd century. While solar worship had existed in Rome long before, it was the Emperor Aurelian who formally elevated Sol Invictus as an imperial symbol and established December 25th as Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. This was not folk religion, it was imperial theology. Sol Invictus symbolized cosmic stability after political crisis, reinforced unity across a fractured empire, and positioned imperial authority as aligned with universal order. December 25th was chosen because it fell just after the winter solstice when the days began to lengthen. It was not astronomically precise, but it was symbolically perfect. Darkness does not win, light returns, order is restored, the cosmos is reliable. That narrative proved politically powerful in times of instability and later theologically useful to Christianity. Christianity did not simply need a date for Jesus' birth, it needed a date that could carry hope without imminence, anchor meaning in cyclical time, and feel cosmically inevitable rather than historically fragile. Late December already accomplished this. It framed light overcoming darkness, tied renewal to cosmic rhythm, and allowed rebirth to be celebrated without requiring verification. The calendar did the work the clock could no longer do. Now, Egypt's role deepens this picture. While Egyptian calendars were complex and did not map cleanly onto a single December 25th festival, Egyptian religious thought was profoundly invested in midwinter renewal themes. Solar theology in Egypt emphasized the rebirth of divine sonship, the strengthening of the sun, and the reassertion of Ma'at, cosmic order. Rather than anchoring meaning to single historical events, Egyptian religion embedded renewal into recurring cosmic cycles. When Greco Egyptian syncretism flourished, especially in Alexandria, it blended Egyptian solar theology, Greek philosophical abstraction, and Roman calendrical structure. This is the intellectual ecosystem in which early Christianity matured. What Egypt supplied was not a date, but conceptual infrastructure, divine sonship, light as order, rebirth without apocalypse, and meaning grounded in cosmic repetition rather than historical deadlines. When Christianity faced the strain of delayed eschatology, Egyptian influenced theology offered a solution. You do not wait for the end of time, you inhabit sacred time. That solution paired seamlessly with Roman calendrical thinking. December 25 works then not because of a single influence, but because multiple systems converged. Rome supplied the calendar and imperial legitimacy. Saturnalia supplied the logic of social renewal. Sol Invictus supplied cosmic light symbolism. Egypt supplied deep time solar rebirth theology. Christianity supplied the need, an urgent need, to survive the delay of its own expectations. So the birth feast does not merely soften Christianity, domesticate Jesus, or create a family holiday. It rescues the narrative from the tyranny of the clock. December 25th was not chosen because early Christians knew when Jesus was born, but because the ancient world already knew what that time meant. Light returns, order holds, and meaning survives the longest night. By the fourth century, Christianity is no longer a persecuted sect operating on the margins of the Roman world. It's aligning with imperial power and increasingly inheriting the empire's structures, rhythms, and symbolic language. Under Constantine, Christianity transitions from survival mode to governance mode. This shift does not require the destruction of existing cultural frameworks, it requires their reinterpretation. The strategy is not erasure, but absorption. The same seasons remain, the same cosmic themes endure. What changes is the narrative layered on top of them. Rather than dismantling the symbolic weight of late December, Christianity repurposed it. The familiar story of the sun's rebirth after the longest night is reframed as the birth of the son, the child version. The return of light becomes Christ as the light of the world. The reassurance once supplied by cosmic cycles is now supplied by theological frameworks. In this way, Christianity does not ask converts to abandon their experience of time, it simply asks them to reinterpret it. The calendar remains intelligible, emotionally resonant, and culturally stable, even if its theological content shifts. This adaptive move is precisely what allows Christianity to function as an imperial religion. A faith that governs populations must operate on shared rhythms. Annual feasts anchor identity, normalize belief, and synchronize communities across geography and class. December 25th becomes official, not because it preserves historical memory, but because it succeeds as cultural strategy. It carries forward meaning people already understand: light overcoming darkness, order returning after chaos, while placing those meanings securely within a Christian framework. In doing so, Christianity transforms the calendar from a witness to cosmic inevitability to a vehicle for theological continuity, ensuring that belief no longer depends on imminent fulfillment, but on repeatable, inhabitable time. Now, here's a little known fact: early and medieval Christmas was not family friendly. Even after Christmas was fully absorbed into the Christian calendar, it bore little resemblance to the holiday people recognize today. For centuries, medieval Christmas was not quiet, sentimental, or domestically focused. It was loud, alcohol heavy, carnivalesque, and frequently chaotic. Rather than emphasizing private devotion or family intimacy, the season functioned as a public spectacle marked by excess and disruption. Streets filled with revelry, feasting spilled into communal spaces, and social boundaries loosened under the license of celebration. Central to this period was the figure of the Lord of Misrule, a mock ruler presiding over games, parody, and inversion of authority. Hierarchies were temporarily suspended, norms were bent, and behavior normally restricted by church or state was briefly permitted. This was not accidental disorder, it was structured release. Medieval Christmas operated as a controlled social pressure valve, no different than Sol Invictus, allowing populations living under rigid economic, religious, and political systems to expel tension without threatening the system itself. Far from being a serene, holy night, medieval Christmas was a managed eruption, ritual chaos contained within a calendar, designed to restore order by briefly allowing its absence. One of the most counterintuitive chapters in Christmas history is that early Protestants did not defend it, they rejected it. Puritans, in particular, viewed Christmas with deep suspicion and, in many cases, outright hostility. To them, the holiday was not a biblical celebration, but a corrupted inheritance from Catholicism and pagan tradition. Because the New Testament offered no command to observe Jesus' birth, Puritans saw Christmas as an example of church imposed ritual masquerading as divine mandate. This opposition was not merely rhetorical. In mid 17th century England, Christmas celebrations were officially suppressed during the Puritan influenced Commonwealth period. Shops were ordered to remain open, decorations were discouraged, and public festivities were treated as moral violations rather than holy observances. The same attitude crossed the Atlantic. In Massachusetts, Christmas celebrations were legally outlawed between 1659 and 1681, with fines imposed on anyone found observing the day. To Puritan authorities, Christmas symbolized Catholic excess, pagan contamination, and the dangerous power of tradition unmoored from Scripture. As a result, in much of early America, December 25th carried little religious or cultural significance. It was often treated as an ordinary workday stripped of ceremony and sentiment. This period reveals an important truth. Christmas was never universally accepted, even within Christianity. Its meaning, legitimacy, and emotional resonance were contested long before it became a cultural cornerstone. The later reinvention of Christmas was not a continuation of unbroken tradition, but a deliberate rehabilitation of a holiday many reformers once tried to erase. The modern Christmas is a 19th century reinvention. By the late 18th century, Christmas in much of Europe and North America was anything but uniform. Observances varied widely by region and denomination. Celebrations were often rowdy or non existent, and the holiday was not primarily associated with children, domestic intimacy, or consumer generosity. In many places, Christmas was either treated with suspicion or ignored altogether. What unfolds in the 19th century is not a continuation of ancient tradition, but a cultural reset, a deliberate reconstruction of Christmas into something new, stable, and socially useful. A central catalyst for this transformation is A Christmas Carol. Dickens' influence cannot be overstated. Before A Christmas Carol, Christmas lacked a single dominant emotional script. After it, the holiday became morally legible. Dickens reframes Christmas as a season of intentional generosity, a test of moral character, a time for reconciliation, and a response to economic cruelty. Crucially, Ebenezer Scrooge's redemption is not theological, sacramental, or mediated by the church. It is ethical and social. That distinction matters. Dickens turns Christmas into a secular moral ritual, one that critiques the excess of industrial capitalism while remaining fully compatible with it. This model spreads rapidly because it works simultaneously for reformers, employers, churches, and families, offering moral coherence without demanding doctrinal conformity. The broader social conditions of the 19th century made such a reinvention necessary. Industrialization shattered traditional patterns of life almost overnight. People moved from villages into crowded cities, extended families fractured, work schedules replaced communal rhythms, child labor expanded, and poverty became both visible and concentrated. Urban societies required new forms of ritual glue, something predictable, emotionally resonant, and repeatable. Christmas became that glue, but only after being reshaped. It had to be orderly rather than carnivalesque, domestic rather than public, and emotionally warm rather than socially destabilizing. To accomplish this, Christmas was pulled indoors. This shift from public festival to private household ritual marks one of the most significant changes in the holiday's history. Medieval Christmas had been loud, communal, alcohol heavy, and socially inverted. Victorian Christmas, now by contrast, became home centered, respectable, child focused, and emotionally managed. This was not accidental. It aligned perfectly with Victorian ideals of the nuclear family, moral parenting, and sentimental domestic life. Christmas became a training ground for bourgeois values, reinforcing norms of discipline, affection, and respectability under the guise of celebration. Children who had previously occupied a marginal place in holiday observance now moved to the emotional center. Childhood was not wildly romanticized, and children were not the primary audience of festive rituals. Victorian culture effectively invents modern childhood, framing it as a space of innocence, wonder, vulnerability, and emotional investment. Christmas becomes the annual performance of this ideology. Gift giving shifts decisively toward children. Wonder becomes central to the holiday's emotional texture, and Santa Claus becomes indispensable. Santa's 19th century evolution reveals another layer of this transformation. He emerges as a benevolent, omniscient, judgmental, naughty or nice, and explicitly child oriented figure. He reinforces obedience, rewards conformity, and trains children in moral self regulation. Santa is not merely folklore, he is socialization technology. By the late 19th century, he is increasingly standardized through illustrations, poems, advertising, and appearances in department stores, preparing the ground for a new economic role. Industrial capitalism faced a persistent problem. Mass production required mass consumption, but consumption had to feel meaningful rather than exploitative. Christmas solved this problem elegantly. It reframed spending as love, generosity, moral duty, and family care. Buying became virtue. Gift exchanged absorbed surplus production, stabilized annual sales cycles, and embedded consumption into emotional life. This is why Christmas does not merely survive capitalism, it thrives inside it. Perhaps the clearest evidence of this reinvention is that modern Christmas morality functions even without belief. One no longer needs incarnation theology, Christology, or church attendance to participate fully in the holiday. What is required instead are kindness, generosity, reflection, and togetherness. That moral framework is not ancient, it's a 19th century innovation. Christianity provides the language, but Victorian culture supplies the operating system. Santa Claus then can be seen as a cultural composite. Santa Claus is not a biblical figure, nor is he the survival of a single ancient tradition. He is a cultural composite. A character assembled over centuries from multiple sources, each contributing specific traits. One strand comes from St. Nicholas, a 4th century bishop remembered in Christian lore for generosity, particularly toward children and the poor. Nicholas provides the moral core of gift giving, but very little of the modern imagery. Dutch traditions surrounding Sinterklaas carry that generosity forward, shaping the idea of a benevolent visitor who arrives seasonally with gifts. British Father Christmas contributes a different layer, less concerned with children and morality and more focused on feasting, abundance, and seasonal cheer. The version of Santa recognizable today, however, is overwhelmingly a modern construction. In the United States, 19th and early 20th century literature, illustration, and advertising fused these older elements into a single standardized character. By the early 20th century, Santa becomes increasingly child centered, omniscient, and morally evaluative. The familiar red suit, jolly demeanor, reindeer, chimney entry, and North Pole mythology are not ancient survivals, but modern narrative additions, refined and popularized through mass media. Corporate advertising, most famously campaigns associated with Coca Cola in the 1930s, did not invent Santa, but they crystallized his appearance and personality into a global, recognizable form. What emerges is not a religious symbol, but a secular mythic figure, a tool of moral instruction, emotional wonder, and consumer ritual, perfectly suited to the modern reinvention of Christmas. So, historically speaking, Christmas is not a single tradition with a fixed origin. It's a continuous cultural alteration. It is the result of layers being added, repurposed, and reinterpreted across centuries. Pagan seasonal rituals supplied the earliest symbolic grammar, light renewal, survival through darkness. Roman imperial culture contributed calendrical structure and cosmic authority, embedding meaning into shared public time. Egyptian theological currents offered a deep time framework in which divine sonship, rebirth, and cosmic order could be understood apart from imminent apocalypse. Medieval society transformed Christmas into a ritualized social release, allowing controlled inversion and communal excess. Victorian culture then moralized and domesticated the holiday, reshaping it around family, childhood, sentiment, and ethical self improvement. Modern capitalism finally absorbed Christmas into a global engine of consumption, embedding identity, generosity, and belonging into annual purchasing rituals. Christmas endures not because it has remained pure or unchanged, but because it has proven endlessly adaptable. Each era retools the holiday to solve its own social, economic, and psychological problems while preserving just enough continuity to feel ancient and inevitable. What survives is not a historical memory of a single event, but a living tradition capable of carrying meaning across radically different worlds. Christmas persists because it evolves, not because it's fixed. When the supernatural claims are stripped away, what remains of Christmas is not empty, it is deeply human. At its core, the season centers on light after darkness, community in the midst of isolation, generosity during scarcity, and reflection at the close of the year. These themes long predate Christianity and extend far beyond it. They arise not from doctrine, but from shared human experience, specifically from the challenge of enduring winter together, both physically and psychologically. Across cultures and centuries, humans have marked this moment in time because it demands meaning. The reassurance that darkness is temporary, that survival is communal, and that renewal is possible. In that sense, Christmas does not belong to Christianity alone. It belongs to humanity, an inherited ritual of resilience, reimagined in every age by people learning how to carry one another through the longest nights. Now, listen, if you're looking for some secular encouragement during the holiday season, head over to Bridge City's channel and check out the newest drops from Bridge City Music. We shared 3 new singles from the upcoming Rise project: Affirmation Song, You Are Good, and Proud. Each and every one of those songs is an anthem and a reminder of our human capacity without appealing to anything other than our understanding of the world. You can listen to all of those songs in full right now for free. And if I don't see you before the 25th, Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy Festivus, Happy Kwanzaa, Happy Saturnalia, Happy Sol Invictus, Happy Winter Solstice. However you celebrate, commemorate, or ritualize holding on to light in the middle of darkness, may your moment be a spark of humanity for others. Thank you for hanging with me today. Until next time, keep rising.